So let's get started. So hello everyone to session 2. Hello again. Hello from Down Under is the title of today's session because we have a very special guest from Australia. And yeah, as always, Johnny and I are hosting this community call around KQL. So as mentioned last time, we truly believe that KQL is the next thing that you should have in your pocket when working, especially with Microsoft technologies, be it for Microsoft security, log analytics, monitoring of your infrastructure. One or the other way, you will come across get across KQL. So that's why we're doing this to, help people, help the community to bring them forward in utilizing KQL. Now, oh no, that's the wrong slide. So our guest today is going to be Matt Zorich. For those who are actively, doing stuff with KQL and are active on Twitter, I'm sure you know him. So maybe Matt, you want to lose a few words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the intro. And firstly, apologise if I yawn. It's 1 a.m. here in Perth. So I live in Perth, Western Australia. I'm a principal cybersecurity specialist and I work in the mining and energy industry. About 4 or 5 months ago, I decided to write one KQL query a day. We're about 140 something or so days in, so we're kind of inching up on halfway. I've got a couple of GitHub repos there, so you can find all the queries if you're interested. There's also another one I put together, which is just some really great learning tips that you can go and kind of check that out. And I guess why I started the 365 days of KQL was, like the guys said, is KQL is kind of showing up everywhere in Microsoft land. It's in Monitor, it's in Advanced Hunting, it's in Azure Data Explorer, it's in Sentinel, of course, and there didn't seem to be a great amount of security focused KQL. There's a lot of performance monitoring and things like this that honestly didn't mean a lot to me from a security point of view. So I thought I'd share some queries with everyone with more of a security focus. So yeah, we're 200 and something days to go and we'll be done. Easy.
Yeah, cool. Well, already now, and I'm sure you're going to talk about your journey in more detail later, but I think on behalf of everyone who's doing KQL, I do really appreciate the inspiration. I really sometimes wonder how you get all those ideas to, to actually pull out the data. But as said, you're going to talk about that in more detail in a few minutes. So our next
further, I have a small addition because last time we announced that every guest will receive a cup. The Rod Trent developed the KQL Cup, and the good news is in about a week or two you will get a package like this, Matt, and in there will be the KQL Cup.
Awesome.
You will be receiving one of these guys because you're one of the guests today, and it's a really awesome cup. So after the show, we'll order one for you, and then it should be arriving really soon. Thanks for joining us.
Where's my cup, Johnny?
Send me your address.
Good. So yeah, today's agenda. We try to give it on one hand a little bit of a structure so people can, expect a little bit what's coming. On the other hand, we just go a little bit freestyle. So today we have some information about KQL tables, what's new in KQL. So Johnny and I discovered either some new tables or some action types in some tables we're going to talk about. Then Johnny has some inputs about working with IOCs. Then we'll briefly talk about KQL Tools. So topic of KQL Tools is basically around anything that can help you in working with KQL. And today we will look at the extensions that we have in Visual Studio Code. Then we'll have Matt talking, and last but not least, we'll touch base on what did you do with KQL this month. Jenny and I have prepared something, but as we keep on repeating, the aim of this call and of this session is to have a community call. So, if you developed something this month and you would like to talk about it, just raise your hand, and share with your community what you did. And then last but not least, we'll have the KQL Challenge of the Month, where we will first look at the submissions that came in from last month. And then Johnny has a new challenge ready for you. Now, before continuing with the new KQL things like tables, let me also briefly mention that we have various ways how to follow us or get in touch. We understand that we have younger, older people, people that like different platforms, and since we want to reach out, to as many people as possible, our main page is the KQLCafe.com. There is where you will find the show notes. So also, if you missed an episode, you can watch it on YouTube. You can go to the website here. Johnny and I do our best to, a couple of days after the show, to also write the show notes, where you find all the links and pointers that were mentioned during this session. We also founded a LinkedIn group. So if you want to join that one, feel free to search for that one. Registration, as always, will go through Meetup, and Johnny also opened a Discord channel. Yeah, and if there's anyone who likes to volunteer in moderating or helping out, please let us know. Yeah. Good. So KQL tables, what's new? So here are 3 tables, or actually 2 new tables. And an existing table with a new action type that we discovered and that we want to briefly talk about. So the very first one is the device TVM software evidence beta table. And as always with those beta tables, at some point the beta suffix will, be removed. So be mindful about, updating your queries eventually at a later stage. And the aim of this table is to allow people that, and I should maybe mention this is specific for Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, more specifically to detect vulnerability management. So while we have great, capabilities to look for information in the portal itself, as I will briefly show you here, when you go to a device and we have a software inventory here, what people were always asking, well, how did it discover this data, right? Based on what criteria does Microsoft Defender for Endpoint believe that I have this particular software installed? So previously, through the UI, if you wanted to know about the .NET framework, how it was determined that this is the exact version, you would have to go to the details page and then either look at the registry path, or in other cases, there would be a file path and a registry key path, or just a file path. And that is basically the indicator that was used to tell you, that you have OneDrive version XYZ installed. Now, upon many requests, especially from the people that do KQL, we now have this information also available through advanced hunting. So what we can do here is the following. Let me open that page here. So we can run this query. Now I joined this because in the device TVM software evidence beta, there's no device name. So if you want to search based on device names or device groups, you would first have to join that information. That's why I go through device info, where I have the device name, and then I join that with DVM software evidence beta data. And what I basically get is when I run that query is that I basically get not only the software name, the software vendor, but now I also get the information, either a disk path or the registry path, how a particular software was identified. Yeah. So, you can use this for multiple purposes. Just this week, a client called me like, we have many different versions of Google Chrome out there, like 12,500 clients, and they were wondering, why they have that many versions, whether there were some artifacts left behind after an uninstall, which of course, if you uninstall the software but it still leaves behind registry paths, especially those that you probably all know in the Microsoft software uninstall, whatever path, current version uninstall. If you have artifacts left, even if the software is installed, you might actually get incorrectly results. But this is not a problem of Defender for Endpoint. This is a problem of an improper installation of the software. So that's the first table we like to bring to your attention. Then the next one is the AAD signing events beta, and actually that's partially true because there's actually also another one, AAD SPN sign-ins, so for service principals beta. And what this allows you to do, again, within Microsoft 365 Defender, is actually to look for Azure AD sign-in events. Previously, you would have to leverage Microsoft Sentinel and use the Azure AD connector in order to actually get access to these logs for hunting or querying. But now that we have this table available also in M365 security, let me open that one. That's the wrong one. So let me try AAD sign-ins beta. And we can now find all the signing information that happened, in our tenant, both, as we know, it's interactive and non-interactive. And we have various properties associated here that might be interesting. The device name, of course, if it was a hybrid joint device or a Intune compliant device, the OS platform, here as I mentioned, the trust type, but also information about the country, state, altitude, latitude, the browser that was used, the user agent, etc. So for those that previously maybe had to work with Sentinel and forward Microsoft Defender for Endpoint logs into Sentinel for the purpose of joining Azure AD data with MDE data, now we can do it all within Microsoft 365 Security Portal and have access to that data as well. This was, of course, well noticed by Matt as well as by Pavel from the Microsoft product team. So here there's also some an additional link that was published recently with some examples, and I'm sure Matt also has some available, but if you're interested, here are a couple of use cases where you can use these tables for. Good. The next one that I actually discovered was that there's a new action type in the device network events, and that's called network signature inspected. Now, I was very hopeful when I first saw this And when we actually do a distinct, and by the way, this is a kind of methodology that I guess everyone who is after new types of data is doing. You take a table, you look at certain attributes like action type that we have across Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, or if you're working with Azure operations logs, you would look for new operational types of events. So while doing this on a repetitive interval, I discovered this network signature unexpected, then looked a little bit closer into it and found out that we have those signature names called DNS request, FTP client, SMB client, and I was very hopeful about them, but I will soon tell you the little disappointment. Let me quickly find my query here. Yeah, this one. And right now, there is, so if I now filter on FTP client, I get a little bit of information. If I filter on SMB client, as always, we get different results in here, but we get those kind of data that is not really telling us anything. Now, currently, I did a little follow-up and listened to what people said about this. This is mainly used for the purpose of the device inventory discovery, right? So at this moment in time, there's no more detailed documentation about it. I hope there will be. But the purpose of these events is mainly for Defender for Endpoint. For those who are using Defender for Endpoint, you might know that when you go into device inventory, we can also now look for network devices, for IoT devices. We can even, find vulnerabilities on those devices. And the explanation I've gathered so far is that those events that are behind the network signature inspected are related to the device discovery. So hopefully soon we'll be able to kind of decrypt the content that is stored within those events. Yeah, so here are some samples, and as always, we'll share any codes that we're showing here in our show notes anyway.
It's also nice if I show these, because I had to play around a bit with these to see out what's happening under the hood. Because this one is the actual, if you would look for a DNS server, you would look for port 53 on connection success or connection found. And you can also summarize these by device counts or totals or remote IPs to see which DNS servers you are using, because you don't want to use any malicious DNS servers. And on the other hand, you also don't want to see traffic over port 53, which is not classified as DNS. So if you go to the next slide. And what we can do is we can use this field, and of course it's still a bit in progress, but you can use this data to see if the traffic is DNS or not. So if you use these queries, then you can actually see, hey, is the traffic in port 53? Is the TCP data, is it DNS? So that way you can identify port 53 in combination with, is it DNS or not? And also you can see, hey, which DNS servers are active on my network? So we can use these queries to actually find DNS servers. And it's working pretty good.
Cool. So yeah, you see, this is, what the community is about. It's all, working hand in hand and extend, explore, new things. Yeah. So thanks for that, Johnny.
Welcome.
So next one, it's also yours.
Yeah, correct. So in the last show, we did the external data bit. And this month, I see that there's several lists on GitHub with threat intel, and one is Ipsum, and that uses about 30 IP lists in combination with the it correlates to each other. And if an IP address is on multiple lists, in this case six, then it will come up to the sixth list. And in this query, I correlated the list to the destination IP from a common security log. So that can be Fortinet, Palo Alto, Cisco, everything that logs to the common security log. So with Ceph, and where the destination IP field is called is filled with the destination IP. Then you can use this as a simple way of using IOCs. So for this month, it's fun to play around with this list. And in next month, we will also share some more information about the external data operator, which options are there, which formats are there. So we're going to play around with that one a bit more. And I see a question in the chat. So yes, we will put the recording on YouTube, and the PowerPoint will be available on our GitHub page.
Yeah. Now, so maybe to quickly elaborate on that. When you go to KQLCafe.com, you will always see, the upcoming shows, as well as here the meetup, the show notes, the video, as well as the latest challenge that we did. Great. So yeah, I'm really look forward to these. There are a million type of ideas and options that we can do with external data. Provided that you're willing to pull data from the internet, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that in more detail, how you can also use external data by basically storing that data into your own Azure blob. So just in case you don't or cannot, host that data publicly. Yeah. If anyone in your community is using external data queries as well, please let us know, or if you'd like to share them in an upcoming session. Great. So under the umbrella of the KQL tools, there are not millions of them, but there are a few, let's call it tools, utilities, handy helpers, that can make your work with KQL easier. So today I want to briefly highlight, just in case someone missed that, should you write your queries or at least do the final formatting, or when you're contributing to the community and want to have some syntax highlighting. So let me quickly show here. This is of course also nice formatted, but it's only because I have a few extensions enabled. More specifically, if I disable this one, you will notice that there's no color and syntax highlighting anymore. And the other one, so let me enable that again. That is interesting, is the language server for Kusto. And while this one has even more capabilities, you can technically use this one also to connect to Azure Data Explorer, but I'm not going to talk about that today. But if there is a reason for you to write KQL offline, or maybe you're that good that you can just type and you need a little helper, with the syntax, with the KQL Kusto server, what you basically can do, you see you have basically a helper here that helps you, to basically help. And then bar chart. So basically, like we know from PowerShell or other programming languages, to help providing us an idea of, what functions we want to use, etc. The extension spec, if you install that one, that's basically installing the color themes, the syntax highlighting, and the language server. And just in case you're wondering, there's also an Azure Log Analytics, Custo, syntax highlighting. That is basically an older one, which hasn't been maintained anymore. So since a while, actually since 4 years. So if you are looking for Visual Studio Code plugins for KQL, I guess these are the ones you would be looking at. The Custo extensions pack, just install them all, and then you have the benefit of all the capabilities I just shown you. Yeah. Good. If anyone is aware of other extensions or anything cool in Visual Studio Code, let us know. And then let me see. I think my slides are. Oh yeah, no, we're good. We're good. Yeah. So a little bit different order as planned, but it doesn't matter. So what did you do with KQL this month? So this is maybe also a great example of teamwork. So a couple of months ago, actually last summer, Microsoft Defender for Identity announced that at some point, they will depreciate WinPCap, which is installed when you install the MDI, so Microsoft Defender for Identity agent on domain controllers. And in order to also capture network traffic from domain controllers, by installing the agent, it would also automatically install the WinPCap driver, which is actually still the case. However, last summer, Microsoft announced that they recommend that going forward, we do install the MPCap. And that means that currently, if you're installing new sensors, what you would have to do is when you download the agent, extract the MPCap binaries, which are already bundled into the download, but not installed automatically. Then first install the MPCap, and that would prevent the MDI sensor agent from actually installing WinPCap. The reason for this is because WinPCap hasn't been maintained anymore since a while, and MPCap is. Microsoft also, in terms of licensing MPCap, gets covered if you're a MDI customer, so that's all fine. But yeah, the question came up, if you have a larger environment, what is the state of my domain controllers? So I actually have one customer who has quite a bunch of domain controllers out there, and in order to get an initial inventory to understand, what is the current state, I started basically leveraging KQL instead of doing it manually. Of course, you could also go to the software inventory again, as I showed before. Again, manually browse through all domain controllers and look at the software inventory. But I found, hey, why not use KQL for this? And the query then basically looks as following. If we run it, let me close that. And then I have, where are you? Here you are. Yeah. So when we run this, in this little demo environment, what we will get is basically, we have two domain controllers and they both have, WinPCap installed, right? So we know, okay, those are the servers we have to address, where basically we have to uninstall the MDI sensor, uninstall WinPCap, install NCAP before, and then uninstall the agent again. So yeah, this query. So what is nice about the evolvement of this query is because I actually initially started with a very simple script. and shared it with Johnny. And he, let's call it, beautified it and added some more logic to it to really make sure we're only capturing domain controllers by means of, systems that have the sensor installed. So first of all, we can use, port 88, which gives a almost accurate, result of systems that are a domain controller. However, there are exceptions. So do not just rely on this one. The next level is, filter it down to Windows servers. And then, of course, filter it down to systems that actually have the sensor installed and running. And then, of course, we look at, any software from the software inventory that has the PCAP word in it, and that will return the information as shown here, either WinPCAP or NPCAP. Yeah. So hopefully this will be helpful for you as well to, get prepared for at some point an update of your MDI sensors. Great. So with that, I would now like to hand over to Matt, who will talk about his KQL experiences.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, like I mentioned earlier, about 140 days ago, I started to do a challenge to share a kind of mostly security-related KQL query every day for the year. Just wanted to, it was mostly, just to practice myself. To be honest, I figured the best way of learning KQL was to make myself use it more. We're obviously a Microsoft Sentinel customer. We're an E5 customer, so we use bits and pieces of the E5 suite. So, and like Alex mentioned earlier, with the Azure AD logs now available in advanced hunting, that's one of the most useful sets of data I think you'll probably find if you're deep into the Microsoft land. That data is really, really easy to make sense of. And I was going to actually show you some examples of that this morning, just using the log analytics kind of test environment that anyone can access. So I'll share my screen. And Alex mentioned, how do I get kind of inspiration for queries? Just having a look at data mostly, or also just what's happening on Twitter. When I wake up in the morning, it seems there's been some kind of cyber fire every day, something new, some new vulnerability, something new to talk about. So there's always a kind of a query to write to help you out, whether it's like a log4j or something else comes along. It's always something, and then everyone forgets about it and moves on to the next thing, as we kind of do in cybersecurity. So let me share my screen. Let me know if you can see that okay. Is that too big or too small? All good. So this is just the log analytics example environment. So anyone can sign into this. You just need any Microsoft account. So if you just search for log analytics demo environment, you'll find this one. I will admit I've not looked at the data at this at all until about 5 minutes ago. So I just wanted to see what was in there. I was going to show you kind of how I make sense of data. So we use Azure AD sign-on logs, which in Sentinel or in log analytics, they're saved under sign-in logs. In advanced hunting, they're under the new AAD sign-in events beta. So usually when I write a query or I'm looking at data, like a lot of people, I just start with kind of the take 10 or take 1 or take 5. Just otherwise you're potentially going to return kind of a billion rows of data, and it's going to take you a little time to make sense. And then, so you can see, I'm not sure if you've not looked at Azure AD sign-in data in Sentinel or in advanced hunting, but you've looked at it in the GUI in Azure AD in the audit log, you see it's almost a 1-for-1 match of what you'd see just by clicking through. So it's really kind of verbose and detailed, and you can really get anything you'd ever want in there, quite honestly. So you can get the IP address of where a person signed in from. any kind of conditional access policies. This one hit 12 different policies. Kind of what client app they're using. It is a browser or is it like a modern client? What location they're coming from, what they're accessing, and their names and how long it took, and all kinds of cool stuff. So I was going to show you, rather than kind of looking for single events today, I was actually going to show you some of the ways you can summarize this data in really neat ways. Because the Azure AD sign-on logs can be quite big, you know, if you've got a couple of thousand users or even more, you'll find you get millions and kind of millions of events in there, and it can get a little overwhelming. So I'll show you some of the really cool summarized stuff. So you can see in this demo tenant, there's about 2,000 events a day. So it's a pretty small, little baby tenant, but that's okay. So if we'll take 10 again and get a look at what we're kind of interested in. So this environment, I don't think they pay for the fast log analytics environment. So if you're interested maybe in what applications were the most used, you can see here we've got there's a field called app display name. So if you wanted to see, let's go back a little bit longer. So if we go back 90 days, and we're going to have a look at all the sign-ins for 90 days. So with Custo, the first thing you always want to do is choose your time period. It's an engine that's heavily kind of optimized for time traffic. So always choose your time period as the very first thing you do. And then what we're going to do is we're going to summarize our app. We'll just call it app count. And then we're going to count by app display name. And all this is going to do is look through 90 days of logs. And the next it's going to do is just count all our applications and see which are kind of the most popular. So we'll let that run. Shouldn't take too long, I wouldn't think. If you're a paid Sentinel customer, it'll run a lot faster. So you can see here there's 173 kind of unique apps that users have signed on to in this portal, in this tenant, sorry. You can kind of arrange it by count here. You can arrange it by name if you're interested in that. And you can also do that. You can do that in your query as well. So if you do it, you can do it, it would be. So if you sort by it, you'll get the same thing, but done for you. Otherwise, it kind of picks them at random for you. If you wanted to do it the other way and sort by, you can then sort by what you've just summarized. So you've just made a count of all your app. This time we wanted to, because we're interested in what's the most popular. And so you can see attack, and then the Azure portal itself, and Azure AD Connect, and the Compliance Center, and all kinds of, because it's a demo environment, so it's mostly people kind of connecting to the Microsoft security tooling. So you can also arrange by lots of other things. So if you wanted to know kind of who the busiest users are, who's connecting to the most, then you just you can then change this to user count to make it look pretty. And here we can see kind of our user count, so who's connecting to the most. And this can be a good indicator of, you know, a couple of people really busy authentications for some reasons and things like that. So you can do, there's also IP address. So you might be interested in where your users are connecting from and things like that. So there's all kinds of ways to summarize this data, and maybe it's interesting to you when users connect from a new IP address and things like that as well. You can go down to kind of more detail again. So if we, interesting ones always, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let me add maybe a little tip here. What I very often do, because it can actually contribute quite a little bit to the costs, and that is if you look into the non-interactive sign-in logs. And I usually run exactly that, you know, summarize count by user principal name. And then you will probably find, at least I do in every environment, like users that create 10,000, 20,000 non-interactive signing logs per day. Now, besides the fact that this can become a little bit costly, what is actually the reason for it? And I've seen several root causes. And this is less of a security issue, but more of an operational health issue. It can be VDI sessions that are left open. It can be incorrect configuration of conditional access with the refresh tokens. It can be users that left the company, but still, weren't properly offboarded from their mobile device, so it continues with failures continuously. So yeah, definitely handy, to look into the non-interactive signing logs and run exactly the queries as Matt was just showing you.
Yeah, definitely, and especially in in Sentinel, if you're paying for non-interactive sign logs, they can actually be quite expensive, as Alex mentioned. There can be weird activity, like he noted, but it's also a lot of these apps are just very chatty. To be honest, Teams just loves connecting kind of in the background very quietly over and over and over and over. If you're in an advanced hunting and you're already paying for that license, you get the advantage of you don't need to pay to ingest that to Sentinel. Thankfully, in Sentinel, you can kind of pick and choose your tables. But yeah, so let's have a look. So an interesting one here I always find is like all the information about authentication, basically. So you've got one here that's called Authentication Requirement, and that's going to tell us whether users logged on with single factor or they needed multi-factor. So if we have a look at that. Let's have a look how good the security in this tenant is. Microsoft always telling us to enable MFA. Let's see how they're doing in their tenant. Might just make this a little less so it's a bit quicker for everyone. We'll do 2 weeks of data instead of 3 months of data. Let that run. So at the moment, we're kind of just doing a summary of one little bit of the data we get. But once this one runs, I'll show you how you can build on that. And because it's nice to know whether something's single factor or multi-factor, I guess, but that's just one data point that kind of doesn't mean much. So you can see in this environment, there's very little multi-factor authentication actually happening. So it's obviously a test environment, so you'd expect that. But if you run that in your environment, you might be interested in kind of what exactly happening. We think we've got MFA enabled everywhere, but maybe we're not getting as much coverage as we thought. And like I say, this on itself is kind of cool. It definitely shows you like a trend, but what we really want is maybe we want to break that down by each application, right? So if you deploy conditional access policies to protect applications, you can actually find out which apps are the most covered and which maybe are the least covered. So to do that, we're going to kind of extend our little summarize here. We're going to make it a little bit smarter. So we're going to call the first one single factor. And then we're going to do a thing called Countif. And Countif basically just says, give me a return when something's true, basically. So we're going to only count when we get a result. So for this one, we're going to do authentication requirement is single factor authentication. Now you guys would probably know when you're doing the double equals, it's case sensitive. So make sure it's, otherwise you're not going to get any results. And then we're going to do multi-factor. We're going to Countif again. And this time we're going to do authentication requirement equals And this time we're actually going to look at that for every app we have in our tenant and see kind of what's the best and what's the worst. Because that might, if we're trying to kind of increase our MFA coverage, that might give us a good place to start, right? You might have some apps here that are pretty good and some that are pretty poor. So we'll let that run. Shouldn't take too long. And this is kind of the way I come up with some queries, you know, things like MFA and phishing and things like that people are always interested in. So you can see here the breakdown of each app, right? So you can see, obviously being a test environment, most of the stuff's all single factor, but you can see the security and compliance center, there's been a little MFA, and the Azure portal, there's been a little MFA as well there. There's an AWS tenancy that you might be interested in securing, and all things like that. So you can kind of get some really nice insights to what your MFA is doing. And so this Countif function's really powerful for that. It's really easy to use. You can kind of count any kind of data. So you could do another one you can do is that people are always interested in, like guests, like what are guests accessing in your tenants, right? Like Azure AD guests, they kind of have a tendency to just pop up everywhere. You know, you invite them to Teams or you share a file with SharePoint and things like this. And before you know it, you might have thousands of guests sitting in your environment. I think in our tenant, we were 45,000 guests in my work tenant, just out of interest. So that you do kind of collect them on the way. So, and when a guest signs in, it's actually flagged in the sign-on log. So you can do the same summarize. We're going to summarize guests, and we're going to count when the user type is guest, and then we're going to summarize members, and we're going to do when the user type is a member. And then we can do the same, right? So we'll see what apps are our guests versus our members accessing, because you might find you expect your guests to be accessing Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint and these things, but maybe they've found access to other apps that you've not hardened. Like if you jump onto the Microsoft App Access panel, you might find a guest can actually see all kinds of things and you weren't aware, right? So if we have a look here, like for in this tenant, the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance Center actually has more guests accessing it than members. So if that was your tenant, that's probably be of concern, right? You probably don't want guests in general accessing your back-end security tooling. You'd expect them to access Teams and OneDrive and SharePoint and maybe even identity governance if they're kind of using access packages and things like that. But some of this should certainly stick out to you as kind of that's not what we'd expect. So it's certainly good to keep an eye on guest usage, and you can do all these queries again in advanced hunting as well now if you're a kind of a P2 customer as well. So the other one that's really cool I was going to show is there's two kind of functions called make list and make set. So if you're interested in what particular users are maybe doing, or if they're connecting from lots of IP addresses or things like that, so Custo can build you a list of data. So if we look at how we do that, so we could make a thing called IP addresses, and I'll show you the difference between these two as well, because it's quite interesting. So we're going to make a list of IP addresses by username, user principal name. So what this is going to do is go and look at all our Azure AD sign-on logs, and for every user that's signed in, go and retrieve each IP they've signed on for. And so here you go. So you've got pdemo at cxp ninja.microsoft. He's got a heap of IP addresses. This might blow up. It might be too big a list, but you can see actually if you look in this list, you've got the same ones over and over and over and over. So, and that's the difference between make list and make set. When you're making a list, it's going to count every single one. If we now change this to make set, Let's run that. You'll see the difference between the two, and sometimes you'll want a whole list of everything, and sometimes you'll just want a set of everything. So when this comes back, you'll see that the difference is when you use the make set operator, it's actually doing it distinct in the same time. So you only get each IP address one time, which might be more useful to you, because obviously, IP addresses, if you sign in 30 times, you probably don't want the same one listed there 30 times, and you're going to end up with these massive lists of IP addresses that are kind of hard to make sense of. And you can do all kinds of different sets. So you could, if you're interested in what applications, you can make a set of this. And that this time it's going to bring us a list back of all the applications that each user has accessed. That might be interesting to you as well. If you've got people just clicking around and trying to access things and, looking at stuff they shouldn't be allowed to. So you can see here you've got 587 different users, and they've all accessed kind of a different lot of stuff. What you can do as well to kind of make more sense of this, you can actually tell Custo to calculate how many apps. So you could do like app count, and there's a thing called array length. So it basically calculates the length of that for us. So if we run that again, now we're going to get the same data back, except it's going to tell us how long each of those sets of applications is, and tell us which users are connecting to the most stuff, basically. So we'll give that a sec to come back. There you go. Now you can see this guy here. So he's connected to 57 unique apps and 12, and then it kind of filters down. So pdemo and AL still, they're kind of your users that you may be interested in, especially the kind of things like this person's connecting to the portal and to all kinds of security stuff and things like that. And you can hunt in there. So if you're only then interested in users that had Azure Portal, you could search for that once you've summarized the data. So once you've summarized data, you can still then run further queries on it. You're not at the end of your query at that point, which is cool. So, and then what I was going to do just for a last little thing, I was actually going to kind of between us all build the next query that I'll share for my 365 days of KQL. So this is my grand plan, is to basically crowdsource the next 220 queries, so I don't have to write them myself, and I can use you guys for inspiration. So what I was thinking is, sometimes we're interested in, sometimes you're interested in what users are doing, and sometimes you're interested in what users aren't doing as well. Sometimes that can be just as interesting, right? So I thought what we'd do is we'd have a look through all our applications in Azure AD, and then what we'll do is we're actually going to find out which ones haven't been accessed lately. They're not in use anymore, and that might be a sign that you've decommissioned the app and it's not in use anymore. It could also be a sign that users are accessing the app, but they're deciding not to use single sign-on because it's less convenient, or they don't have to MFA. So if you're using Jira or Confluence, or you've got an app out there that you've configured for SSO, but users also have the ability to just log on with a local set of creds. So you might find that if you're not getting sign-on event data in your Azure AD tenant, that's a sign that people are bypassing it, right? And then you can go around and slap them or whatever's appropriate in your organization. So to do that, we're going to use a really cool operator that's one of my favorites, and it's called argmax. And so what this operator does is it returns the very latest record of what we tell it to. So if we tell it to return the latest record for a username, it's going to find us the very latest record. So if I've signed in 500 times to this tenant and I run this operator, it's only going to find me the very latest. And that's what we're interested in. We're interested in the very latest sign-in for all our apps. To do it, we say we're going to maximize time generated. And this little star just tells us once we've found the latest record, actually return all the data associated with that, and then we can manipulate it later. And then we do by, and this is where we tell Custo what do we actually want to return the latest record on. If you do it on a username, it'll return the latest log on for each user. If you do it on IP address, it'll return the latest record for IP address. If you and all the way down the line. So what we're actually going to do is there's a couple of options here. One's nearly right and one's definitely right. So a potential one is app display name. So that's going to bring us back kind of the friendly name here. The issue with that is app display names aren't actually, they're not set in stone in Azure. So what might happen is you might rename an app for whatever reason. Microsoft renames apps all the time, as we're aware. So maybe a better one to do is actually service principal ID. So what that's going to do is bring back the latest record for each service principal. Now this is the service principal ID is like immutable until you delete it out of your tenant. So let's run this and see what it comes back with for us. And so this is going to return the very latest record we have of every service principal ID in our tenant, and then we can see are our apps being used, and what can we delete or what can we make sure that people are using SSO for. Always good to, if stuff's unused, always good to delete it for sure. Oops, that's not what we're expecting. We'll try app display name.
I think if you use the app ID.
App ID, is it? Yeah, it could be app ID, you're right. Yeah. That's the other thing is if you use advanced hunting, that the names of things aren't an exact match, unfortunately. So you kind of get, I think they're going to try to bring them in line for us, but time generated is timestamp in advanced hunting, and so it's not quite a match, unfortunately. So you can see here we've got 176 items. So essentially 176 different apps, and this is the most recent sign-in for them. So here's CA attack, and here's, what's this app called? The Defender ATP portal, and so on and so on. So we've got a heap of data here still. So we want to actually clean this up, and how do we make sense of this, right? Because there's still a lot of stuff here. So we can kind of clean this up in a couple of ways. We don't need that much stuff. What we want is the time generated. And what I like to do is I love to rename these columns as I write queries, just so anyone reading them, it makes a lot more sense. So we can call this one last logon time. So you can rename columns during a project as well. You don't need to kind of extend or anything like that. And we'll get the app display name because that's the friendly name that we're interested in. That's something that's going to mean something to you. Put the app display name first, and then the last logon time. And then like a really cool one to do is it'll come back with a UTC date finally, and that's even that can be a bit hard to understand, especially us in Australia and Europe that use proper date format. We use day, month, year, and the stuff in Microsoft land's all month, day, year, and I never get used to it. So what I like doing is get it to calculate me how many days since someone logged on, so we can do days since, and give it a nice pretty title again. And so you've got this another really nice operator, which is date time difference, right? So what date time difference does is it'll calculate how long between two events for us. So you can even tell it what to use. You can do seconds, you can do minutes, you can do days. I don't know if it goes any higher than that. Usually after days, I'm not particularly interested in it. And then we're going to do time generated. And so we want to calculate between the time we pull back from our query and now. And that's going to hopefully give us the app display name, the actual timestamp someone last logged onto it, and it's going to calculate us like a really friendly time to when someone logged in. So let's try our luck. This might give us an indication of what's no longer in use, what we can delete, what we can make sure that users are doing single sign-on for, because, you know, a lot of SaaS apps out there, they'll support single sign-on, but not necessarily enforce it. And sometimes it's quite hard to enforce that behavior because really it's a user behavior thing, and often there's not a technical control you can put in. I just realized I've got this back to front. So not the other way, otherwise we're going to go back in time. So let's have a look now at I think we said we had 157 apps, so we can see which of them are used actively, which one of them's not being used. Just give it a sec, and then we'll get some really good insights. And you could use similar logic to find out when users last logged on as well. Definitely. So if you summarize this by a username, you'd be able to calculate the username when they last logged on as well. So if you have a look here, here's all our friendly app names. Here's the UTC, the actual timestamp of the event, and this is our calculated column here. So if we change that, we can see Yammer, poor Yammer. No one loves Yammer in this tenant. So no one's actually signed on to Yammer in this tenant for 77 days. You can scroll on down and see there's all these apps. LinkedIn Learning's not getting much love, Power Apps and all that. And then that might give you some kind of direction to go and be like, oh, that's weird, because I know we use Power Apps, or I know we use LinkedIn Learning, plus I've configured it for SSO plus MFA. Why is no one using it, kind of thing? And that can kind of get you going. And then you can even, if you're only interested in where days since last log on, that becomes another field that you can query on. So you might say, okay, well, our threshold's going to be 30 days, you know. After 30 days, we want to be alerted about it, because before that, maybe it's just not a very popular app. Or so you can, like I say, you can, once you've summarized your data, you can continue to manipulate it after the fact as well. This one's missing a app name, but that's okay. But so now we're down to 47 apps in our test tenant that we haven't had a single sign-on event for. And like I say, you might want to go investigate why that is. If it's an app, you know, if you say, oh yeah, we stopped using Dynamics ERP, then what you do is you go and delete the app out of Azure and clean it up as well, because, you know, otherwise it's a service principal that's sitting there potentially with some privilege as well that you'd want to get rid of in your tenant if it's not used. You know, the most secure service principal is the one you just deleted, right? So that's a little example. You can also, we'll open up another one very quickly and show you how you use the same summarize, but you can kind of visualize your stuff quickly as well. So we'll do the same where time generated. We'll do 30 days of data. Summarize, if we just want to count, just like total sign-ons by name. And then if you want to build visualizations of your data, what you need to do is you need to basically break your data up into time chunks, and then it will be able to make it look pretty for you. So our first line here says we're going to look at 30 days of total data, but maybe we want to break that 30 days up into 8 hour blocks or something. So if we do this first, this will just bring us back basically each app in our tenant, who signed on to it, oh sorry, how many people signed on to it in every 8-hour block of time. You can see here, you can see it goes 8, etc., etc., etc. Now, obviously that's not very useful for us to read as humans, but once you've broken it up, you can then very simply tell or log analytics or whatever you're using to kind of visualize it for you. And you can see, you can probably hear my computer chugging. There's obviously a lot of data there, but you can see the sign-ons for each little app there, which is really cool. And you might say, you can smooth it out, or you can do bigger time periods or things like that. So the other one you can do is earlier we did the MFA versus non-MFA. So if we go back to that, single factor equals authentication. I'm just going to go back here just to make sure we get the names right. And again, because it's very particular with its naming. If you don't get it exactly right, it's not going to find anything. You can do, you probably found on the first episode of KQL Cafe, you can do contains and things like that, but they're a little bit slower. So I find if you can do an exact match, then try to do an exact match, because your queries are going to run much quicker. Yeah. Requirement. That was multi-factor authentication. I shouldn't have left that visualization up. That's okay. That's been. So this time we're going to look at the same Countifs we did before. So we're looking at single factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, but this time we're going to kind of break it up into one day blocks and then visualize it again. This shouldn't be as much data, so it's a lot quicker. So you can see we've summarized our data by saying, show me all the sign-ons that are single factor, show me all the sign-ons that are multi-factor, break it up into each one-day block, and then show me what it looks like. And then, this is awesome. You look at a little multi-factor, and then you go to your boss with the picture and say, we need more MFA, we need to do passwordless, give me more money. I can do all the great things with more money. So, and these things here, you can also do, these can be multiples. So a Countif can be, you could do and user type equals guest, for instance, and that would show you, look, so we can do single factor, we can do and then we can do member. We're just going to copy this. And this one's going to be member. And then we do multi-factor. And Countif. Multi-factor. So this time we've kind of made it even smarter. So we're going to look at 4 different things now. We're going to look at our guests that are single factor, our guests that are multi-factor, our members that are single factor, and our guests, our members that are multi-factor. Boom, and then we can get a nice summarized data and make it look awesome, things like that. So it's really, really powerful to summarize that data. You just got to kind of take a bit of time to look at what's happening, spend a bit of time playing in there. It's one of those hard things, I think, with any Microsoft product or any kind of cloud product. It just changes so frequently. So actually spending a bit of time, like Alex and the guys said, you just get new data pop up suddenly, and then you go, oh, that's awesome. And I think sometimes that's the hardest bit, is just what's actually in there and how quickly it changes. So hopefully that's been like a useful little demo of a way to just summarize your Azure AD data. You can do that with anything. You can use the same concepts for Active Directory, data security events, security alerts, email events. You know, these kind of, that's the cool thing about KQL, is that once you kind of learn a summarize, or once you learn these little functions and operators, you can really apply them over and over and over and over and over, just to different things. That's all my queries are, right? Mine's like the same 10 things, just with different data sets. So, oh yeah, I think that's about it for me, guys. Unless there's anything else. This one we wrote. I'll chuck that up after the session, and that can be day 142 or whatever we're up to. I have to check my Twitter every morning to make sure I don't skip a number. And this one's cool if you guys want to use it to, make sure people are using SSO. It's single sign-on's key, so it's a good place to start. I think that's it. Hopefully that was useful, guys.
Wow. It's really cool what you displayed, man. It's
it mostly
we all
works,
know KQL, but the usage is, you always get to learn new things. So awesome. Yeah,
so I think that's just the nature of it. Everyone kind of, with KQL, there's so many ways to do the same things, right? You can, for good or bad. So I think everyone kind of finds their little niche and their ways of doing things, and that's why it's awesome getting the community together, because someone could visualize this exact same data in slightly a different way, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. That's an awesome way of doing that. So yeah, and like I say, if anyone wants help with queries, hit me up. I always say, if you ask for my help and I give you a hand, that's totally fine, but I am going to steal it for the next day of 365. So I get a free one if I help you out. So cheers, everyone.
Cool stuff.
Just trying to get the cat out of my room. Thanks, Matt. As always, lots of inspiration. I especially like the fact that, you know, you seem to have developed a sort of a framework or a certain query pattern. As you mentioned, you just exchange data types, to pull out different data sets out of the various tables.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's one of the tougher things, is actually just the consistency of data across tables. Look, the advanced hunting stuff's pretty good, because that's all obviously Microsoft products. But as you start using Sentinel, you might be throwing in GitHub or an Active Directories like AD logs. If you're using Sentinel, there's a really good chance AD logs are in there, and they can be quite picky, and they're not quite as nice. So, half the battle is knowing what tables to look in and what stuff's called in different places. So, Azure AD calls it a user principal name, but if you do Office activity, which is like your Teams and your OneDrive, it's user ID. And that mapping, it's a little infuriating, but so you just got to have a look, right? It's the only way to do it, unfortunately, is just to go. What I do is, like, if the guys on the call are much like me, there's a chance you've got a fair bit of privilege, right? If you're playing advanced hunting and things like that. So use your account, right? Obviously, don't do anything destructive, but if you're interested in generating, just generate them with your own account, and then that gives you a good place to start. So, you know, if you delete a service principal, or you create a service principal, or you add secrets to a service principal, you can do it with your own account, right? And then because then you'll be like, oh, well, I can do this, and I'd be interested if anyone else did this for sure, especially people that I didn't expect. And that's a good place to start, right? And that's often what I do is, go and flick switches myself. In our team, we do a thing called a KQL Scavenger Hunt. So we're trying to upskill the wider team in KQL, and so I'll go and basically do something in the environment, and they all have about 45 minutes to go and find it. I'll give them a little hint of kind of what I did, and then we set them on their way. And being Australians, they're very competitive, and it gets, you know, everyone cheats, and they've started to look during midweek at what I've been doing to try and get an advantage. So yeah, the cheating Australians down here, you can't trust them.
Okay. Yeah. No, but you know, maybe another comment. What I found very inspiring, and maybe also for people that are just trying to learn KQL. You know, when I see you typing the things, it goes so fluently, and I recognize myself back in the days when we all started with PowerShell. You know, for years, I always say that, you know, I'm better in evangelizing things than I can actually do it. But with PowerShell, I've experienced myself and helped others. You know, in the beginning, it's like, okay, copy paste. You know, look around. You know, go back to what I wrote last week. And I always encourage people that, you know, the more you practice, you know, at some point, you know, you don't even need that syntax helper or whatever. You know, you just type your way, you know, ahead, and it just needs that little learning curve, you know, until you get to a, you know, level of self-confidence where things just go more fluently. Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Look, so I'd not used like Splunk or SQL or anything like that before we started using Sentinel. So look, if we got charged for every time I generated an error with a query, like, my company would be bust. So it doesn't cost anything to write bad queries, and I've written plenty over the time. So yeah, just keep trying. It's not an issue. Once you, like you say, once you get over that little hump, and it just kind of all clicks into place. Absolutely, you're spot on with that for sure. So, like, I hadn't written any KQL up 12 months ago, barely, like one or two queries. I'd not touched it. So, and if I can learn, trust me, anyone can. There's the people on this call will be way smarter than I am. I guarantee it. So,
yeah. Cool. Yeah, definitely an inspiration. So, anyone on the call have any questions to Matt? Or just say thank you to him for all his contributions? Don't be shy. We try to be interactive. Or just
then I'll have a question. What will you do after the first year ends?
Someone's actually, a couple of people have asked that, so I won't write anything for the very first few days. That's for sure. It's not that it's stressful. Like, to be honest, someone asked me recently if I ever get like writer's block, and like, I haven't. I'd admit that I've got about the next 100 written. They're just in my email. Like, I just like it's like taken out of the cupboard, right, and just dust one off and what's interesting. But as stuff comes up, you might find things are more topical. So yeah, a few weeks ago there was a lot of like stuff about OAuth phishing and consent phishing. So then we'll write some queries about that. So, but now, look, I'll keep using KQL. I use it every day as my job anyway. It's like I literally get paid to kind of do that work day to day. So I don't think I'll do another 365 days, but we'll find something. We might kind of do a little month by month theme. I was thinking, so we could do a phishing month, and then something like that. So there's always something to write. There's always new data sources as well. So, and then at some point, all the Defender
and also
products
if
will
you,
have their names changed, and we'll have to update the queries, and that'll keep us busy.
yeah, and if you also incorporate the scavenger hunt idea, that would be really awesome.
Yeah. So that's the other thing I was trying to do is a way to involve the community in that. The demo tenant might be the way to do that, but I think that data changes quite frequently, and I wouldn't want to send people going looking for something and then it's not actually there. That would be pretty mean. But yeah, we might be able to come up with something for the community, to like a little play area or something that's a little more static.
Cool stuff.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. So, yeah, as you might have noticed, I got a little bit mixed up with the agenda and the order of things. So, as one famous person used to say, I have one more thing, which I actually also would like to share with you that I'm currently working on. And this is around, I'm not done yet, but I'm showing it anyway. Maybe someone also has some ideas. So we all know, old file types, old Office file types can be bad. So ideally, we block them at the perimeter. That will be the easiest way. But yeah, if we are realistic, in larger companies, there is still a lot of old file types either coming from the outside in. I mean, I don't know why, but I still see DHL and UPS, sending legitimate emails with tracking numbers in, 15-year-old Office file formats. So I started to actually build some queries to help people actually understand, what type of attachments are actually coming in. Now, obviously, this demo tenant, this information is not, going to be very interesting, but just so you get the idea. Let me see. So was this the right one? Around query, email events. Yeah. So we see the amount of emails, what went out, what went in, what was intranet, so intra-core company, the file types, etc. And then, of course, we're only interested in what are called the legacy file formats. So I'm gonna filter on them, and of course there's nothing in this Microsoft demo tenant, but just to give you an idea. And yeah, I'm currently working on a blog post with even more queries that I have derived from here. Actually, once I go in email and I've identified the people that sent those documents internally, I want to go to the next level and actually understand, well, receiving those attachments is one thing, but who's actually still producing them? So the journey goes further by actually also looking at the device related events, like device process events, device file events, to actually identify whether those type of documents are still being internally produced by Word, Excel, and with the idea, to then provide enough data and evidence to allow decision makers make the call on, whether on the ingress point we're going to block those file types, or whether in Microsoft Office, we're going to no longer allow people to save and open files of older file formats, etc. So yeah, just another example how great KQL can be in our daily life to just aggregate data and rather assuming things come to the table with clear facts, and allow people to make decisions based on what's really happening and not what people are just assuming is happening. Yeah. Good. So with that, I would like to bring back to Johnny. I think you also have something ready for us, right? with regards to the challenge, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we did the challenge last month regarding the external data one, when we wanted to see if people got new external data queries for us to share. And there was a submission by Shivyam, and he won the challenge. So what I'll do is if I can share my screen.
Yeah.
You can also, yeah. So share screen. And what he submitted, he submitted a query to use a different feed than we used in the show. So he used the C2 Intel feed, and he is using Defender for endpoint to parse the IP addresses. And he so he gets the list, he creates the report, or he extends the report, and he gets the IP addresses from there, he projects them, and then he uses a union to compare the IP addresses against the list. And this is a good way to do a basic detection on Cobalt Strike. So that's the query that has won. Can see if it's doing something in my own environment. So let's create a new tab.
Hopefully not.
First, dissect the first part, so malicious IPs, that we can see what it actually does. So we have a list of 1149 IP addresses. And let's see how the data looks like. Okay. So the data is constructed of 2 columns, IP addresses and the tag possible Cobalt Strike. And then we get the remote IP. Okay. And you can. Okay, so he created every line as a string. And then he splits it over here. Do it like this. Did I miss something? So now you have every line as a whole string. Now we have the specific remote IP addresses, because he does toString and gets the first column, and then he only shows the remote IPs. So now we have a nice list of remote IP addresses, which we want to match against our device network events. And luckily for me, we don't have any match in my network. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, thanks for the contribution. So maybe if you can quickly go back to GitHub, I can maybe quickly also elaborate on the submission.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you can see here, the submission was done through an issue. So we understand that not everyone is familiar with using GitHub. So you basically have two options, either clone the repository and commit your stuff into the repo, or as an alternative, you can actually go, if you can go to issues, please, on the top. Yeah, and there you can just say, new issue, and we created a template, and you can say, okay, new query. Yeah, and then you can just place your content in here, and Johnny and I will take care of, getting it back into the repository and can close the issue. But yeah, we try to make it as convenient as possible for you, to submit your queries, or ideas. And of course, if you have any questions, you can post them here as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Good.
So then,
challenge.
for this month, I come up with a simpler challenge, because we want also, the sharing of the queries is one, but we want also to have people the experience to use KQL in their own environment. So this month, what we have done, the challenge isn't without a submission, but one way you can test your knowledge. So what we've done is we created a challenge on the GitHub page. Let's see where I have it. KQL community, challenge of the month, and February. So there are some basic simple questions for Defender for Endpoint about OS platforms and versions, where you can count all unique devices and stuff like that. Unique devices per public IP address, Azure AD joint status, incoming connections, and registry changes. So these are some basic topics where you can play around with the simple where statement, where operator. You can use the summarize one, and you can just do some basic searching in your data. And then what we'll do is on the 8th of March, we will share on the same page, we'll share the solutions. So you can compare how we did it and how you did it. And then you can, we can learn for each other.
Great, look forward to it. And in all fairness, not everybody might have access to 365 Defender. So, if you just want to come up with another nice query summarizing data, maybe, you're just doing log analytics with your Azure AD data or any firewall data, that's welcome as well. Yeah. Good.
Cool.
So let's see if we have any further questions, feedbacks. Anyone? No. Okay. I think everybody was happy with my session. I'm sure, as I mentioned in the very beginning, that now at least here in Switzerland and also in the countries around us, the regulations around this pandemic has been, you're completely removed. So I guess people are now slowly more joining their free time after work and meet with friends, and instead of spending dinner time with KQL. Nevertheless, for all those that have attended, thank you very much. And I'm sure one or the other will definitely look at your recording. We've seen quite some views on the YouTube recording from last time. We also had some great feedback, also from Microsoft itself, by the way. We do hope that we get some more people as guests. We already have planned a few people for the coming show, that are willing to share and talk about their experiences of KQL. But again, we do not just need rock stars. Move forward. If you like to share your things, let us know if you like to talk about your experience. Let us know if you have questions. Again, let us know. We're here to help you, and hopefully the community will continue to help each other. Yeah. So Matt, thanks again for staying awake, or, well, how should I say? Maybe
I went to bed and got back up, and now back to sleep before the kids wake up for school. But no, it's been my pleasure. So hopefully it was useful. And like I said, if anyone has any queries, just reach out to me. Always happy to help.
Great, thank you. Johnny, any final thoughts, words?
No, I'm thinking in a day or two I'll put a poll on LinkedIn and Twitter to see the times, because we picked 6 till 8 now, but I think now that the world is coming to life again, we should maybe see what other people think about the times. And I think the 2-hour slot works for us with the knowledge we want to share. But if people want to comment on time slots or times, let us know.
Yeah, maybe we can use the momentum, at least for those that are in the on the live call now. Do you maybe want to give a little comment whether this time slot was okay for you, or if you have any other suggestions? Someone is typing.
So it's working for Mike because he is in US Eastern time.
Yeah,
but that's good.
Right. Yeah, we'll definitely also including a poll where people are coming from. And again, yes, there's a recording, but yeah, of course, we do appreciate live attendance as well. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks for that feedback. Good. Then I have nothing more to talk about. We're a little bit closing a little bit earlier as planned, but yeah. I think we all had enough overload with all the inspiration that we got from Matt. So anyone who told their family or their boss that they're busy until another 15 minutes, maybe can take that time and run those queries from Matt in their environment and and maybe come up with some good data. Yeah. Okay. And thanks all for participating. I just see we got some more feedback in. Okay, great. Kudos to Matt. Yeah. Okay, great.
I don't know what the 22nd month is, Mike. We only have 12 months in Australia, but.
Okay, good. Then thanks everyone for attending. Thanks, Matt, again. And
awesome. Thanks, guys.
Hopefully see you all back in March.
Awesome. See you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Great.